Have you ever been judged? Before you even said a word? Dismissed. Because of the way you looked. Or the way you dressed. Imagine walking into a building where your signature could save the company. But instead, you're treated like you don't even belong. Pushed. Mocked. Ignored. That's exactly what happened to Julian West. A quiet billionaire. With power no one in that lobby could recognize. Until it was far too late. What started as humiliation turned into a reckoning. By the time they realized who he was, their empire was already crumbling beneath them. And Xavier? He didn't seek revenge. He believed in consequences. This is the story of what happens when the world underestimates the wrong man. And it all started with a receptionist who said, "Deliveries go to the back." The morning air was cool, the sky still holding onto that soft gray light before the sun fully claimed the city. A gentle breeze stirred the collar of Julian West's charcoal cashmere sweater as he stood silently across the street from a towering glass structure that gleamed like a monument to progress. Stratton Dynamics Enterprises. 38 stories of steel and ambition. Sleek. Impressive. Alive with movement as employees streamed through the revolving doors, clutching coffee, checking phones, adjusting ties. To any outsider, Stratton Dynamics looked like the pinnacle of American innovation. But to Julian West, it was just another company on a very long list. A potential partner. A name on a report. One of many he'd been quietly observing for months. He raised his wrist, checking the time on his Philippe complication watch, subtle, elegant, and mostly unnoticed by those who didn't know what they were looking at. It was 8:37 a.m. "Are you sure about going in alone?" Jacob, his chief of security, had asked him just hours before. "I can have a team ready in 20 minutes, he'd offered. But Xavier had simply smiled. "The best way to understand a company's culture," he'd said, "is to see how they treat people when they don't know they're being watched." And now here he was. Alone. Blending in. Observing. He stepped off the curb and crossed the street. Each stride was purposeful. Controlled. His clothes were carefully chosen, tailored slacks, hand-polished Italian leather shoes, and that perfectly cut sweater. No logos. No flash. Just quiet wealth, hidden in plain sight. As he approached the entrance, he noticed something. A tall white man in a navy suit walked in, and the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned. Smiles appeared. Security gave polite nods. Xavier took note. When he entered the building, the change was immediate. Where the suited man had received respect, Xavier received suspicion. Glances lingered. Conversations paused, then quickly resumed in hushed tones. A young executive clutched her purse a little tighter as he passed. He didn't flinch. The lobby was a showcase of modern luxury, white marble floors, abstract art, sleek lighting. The kind of place that screamed money and made sure you knew it. At the center of it all was the reception desk. And behind it sat a young woman, blonde hair and a perfect updo, scrolling through her phone with one hand while tapping her polished nails against the desk with the other. Ashley Monroe. Receptionist. Gatekeeper. And self-declared queen of the lobby. A nervous intern stood beside the desk, trying to get her attention. "Excuse me," the intern said softly. Ashley rolled her eyes without looking up. "Check the directory," she muttered, waving vaguely toward a glowing screen across the room. "I'm not Google Maps." The intern mumbled a thank you and walked off, red-faced and embarrassed. Ashley smirked, clearly pleased with herself. That's when Xavier approached. She didn't look up. He waited a moment, then said, "Good morning. I have a meeting with Charles Whitman at 9. Her fingers continued tapping. "Name?" she asked. "Julian West." Now she looked up. Her eyes did a quick scan, skin tone, sweater, no badge, no briefcase. Her face shifted from disinterest to something colder. A slight scoff escaped her lips. Right, she said. Deliveries go around back. Service alley entrance. Xavier blinked once, slowly. I'm not delivering anything, he said, calmly. Please check the executive calendar. You'll see a 9 o'clock with Charles Whitman. It's regarding a potential partnership between Stratton Dynamics and Cole Innovations. Ashley sighed, loudly. She set down her phone, made a dramatic show of clicking into her system, though Xavier could see, her fingers weren't even touching the keys that accessed the calendar. Nope, she said, popping the P at the end. Nothing under Cole. No meetings with Richard until 10. Maybe you got the time wrong. She leaned forward slightly, voice lowered but loud enough to sting. Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but Mr. Lawson doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Especially not with people who, she glanced down at his outfit, then back up, might be wasting his time. Still, Xavier didn't move. His expression remained unreadable, but his silence carried weight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I'll call Richard directly. That's when Ashley stepped out from behind the desk. Her hand shot out and grabbed his forearm, surprisingly firm for someone so petite. Sir, she said, louder now, clearly trying to draw attention. I already told you. There's no meeting. You need to leave. Conversations around the lobby began to slow. Heads turned. Xavier didn't resist. He looked down at her hand. Then, slowly, up into her eyes. Take your hand off me, he said. His voice was quiet. Even. But the authority in it was unmistakable. Ashley's fingers loosened instinctively. But she recovered quickly. Security, she called, louder now. We have a situation. 2 security guards approached. Big. Broad. Serious. Ashley pointed. This gentleman is refusing to leave. He's claiming to have a meeting with Mr. Lawson, but he's not on the schedule. The taller guard stepped in front of Xavier. Sir, I need you to step outside, he said. There seems to be a misunderstanding, Xavier replied. I have a scheduled. The guard cut him off, grabbing his upper arm. We can discuss it outside. The second guard flanked him, effectively boxing him in. A crowd was forming now. Curious eyes. Whispered jokes. Ashley crossed her arms and smirked. These guys never know their place, she muttered to a colleague nearby, just loud enough for Xavier to hear. Xavier didn't resist. But something in his eyes shifted. Just for a second. A flicker of something colder. Sharper. The elevator chimed behind them. A white man in his 50s stepped out, tailored suit, salt and pepper hair, expensive watch. Derek Stanton. Executive Vice President of Operations. He surveyed the scene with a frown. Is there a problem? He asked. Ashley straightened. No problem, Mr. Reynolds. Just someone trying to talk his way into a meeting that doesn't exist. Mark's eyes landed on Xavier. And for a moment, just a breath, recognition flashed across his face. He knew who this was. But then he looked away. Well, I'm sure our team has it under control, he said. He turned to leave. Security should handle these types right away, he added over his shoulder. Ashley laughed softly. Another one trying to beg for a job or something. The guards began escorting Xavier toward the exit. As they reached the revolving doors, Ashley leaned in and whispered. Maybe next time, dress the part. This isn't a welfare office. She stepped back with a satisfied grin. The guards gave Xavier one final shove. He adjusted his sleeves, straightened his sweater, and walked out into the morning air. Behind him, laughter echoed faintly through the glass. Ashley returned to her desk, already sharing her version of the story. Inside, the lobby buzzed with amusement. Outside, Julian West stood motionless on the sidewalk. He pulled out his phone. glanced at the screen, then looked back at the building. Stratton Dynamics Enterprises. They didn't know it yet, but their fall had just begun. The moment Julian West walked out of Brightwell's lobby, the atmosphere inside shifted. It wasn't immediate. It was subtle. A creeping tension that began in the whispers of employees and grew louder with each passing hour. Ashley Monroe was still basking in her brief moment of petty triumph. She laughed. She retold the story. Again and again. Each time adding more dramatic flair. Each time feeling a little more important. But outside those marble walls, something much bigger was moving. At precisely 10:23 a.m., Brightwell's stock took its first hit. Just a dip. A flicker. The kind of thing most analysts might overlook. But in Xavier's world, every move was calculated. Every consequence deliberate. Inside his sleek black Bentley, Xavier sat in silence, watching the financial markets react in real time. The notification flashed. Stratton Dynamics stock down 1.2%. Volume spike detected. His assistant's voice came through the car's intercom. "Sir, the legal team is assembled and ready for your directive." Xavier didn't answer immediately. He watched the city pass by through tinted glass. Then calmly replied, "Proceed as discussed. Terminate all agreements with Brightwell. Initiate Delta contingency." Back at Brightwell, Ashley's phone buzzed. A company-wide email. "All senior management report to conference room A, partnership emergency. Security footage attached." Confused, she tapped the attachment. Her smile faltered. On screen, in high definition, was her, grabbing Xavier's arm, rolling her eyes, smirking, mocking. No audio. But none was needed. The video said everything. By now, whispers had grown into roars. Executives pacing. Phones ringing. Lawyers sweating. Upstairs, in the executive suite, Charles Whitman, the CEO of Brightwell, stood frozen, staring at the same footage. His expression unreadable. "Get him back," he barked. "I don't care what it takes, send a car, offer the damn building if you have to. Just get Julian West back here." But it was already too late. Derek Stanton, the man who had smirked during Xavier's humiliation, the executive vice president of operations. He knew. He knew what was coming. He had seen the look in Xavier's eyes. Not anger. Not even disappointment. It was worse than that. It was focus. Cold, calculated, surgical focus. As panic spread through the company like a virus, Melanie Harper stood silently on the mezzanine level. She had seen everything. She had known who Xavier was from the moment he walked through those doors. His face had been on the cover of Forbes just last month. But she hadn't spoken. Hadn't intervened. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew the price. She had worked too hard to rise in that building. Endured too much. To throw it all away for a moment of conscience. And yet, now she stood in quiet fury, watching the company she had sacrificed so much for begin to crumble. Downstairs, Ashley's world was starting to shake. Another email. This one, just for her. Ashley Monroe. Report to HR Conference Room C at 11 a.m. disciplinary hearing. The time on the clock read 10:55. She stood, legs trembling. Her designer heels felt like anchors. Every eye in the lobby followed her. No one smiled now. No one laughed. Her coworkers, the ones who had cheered her earlier, now avoided her gaze. They had found their scapegoat. Meanwhile, Xavier was back in his office, calmly reviewing profiles of Brightwell's executive team. He paused over Derek Stanton's file. Noted the secret back-channel emails with Nexus Tech. Noted his opposition to the partnership. Activate legal, Xavier said to his assistant. Full audit. Personal liability. Derek Stanton and Ashley Monroe. Across town, Brightwell's CEO was fighting a battle he had already lost. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His assistant looked like she might faint. Every major tech outlet was running with the story. And then came the final blow. A new email. Sent to every major news platform in the country. Subject line. Julian West has left the building. The message was simple. Direct. Cole Innovations had terminated all discussions with Stratton Dynamics Enterprises. Effective immediately. Attached was the security footage. Charles Whitman read it in stunned silence. Then slowly turned to face his board of directors. He was here, Richard said, voice hollow. He came. Alone. Unannounced. Just like he always does before finalizing deals. Derek Stanton tried to interrupt. He didn't look. Enough. Richard slammed his fist on the table. You recognized him. I saw your face in the footage. And you let this happen. As silence fell over the boardroom. Downstairs, reporters had begun to gather. Stratton Dynamics stock was in free fall. -5%. -10%. -15%. They couldn't contain it. They couldn't spin it. They couldn't undo what had been done. In her car, parked in the underground garage, Brittany Keller sat gripping the steering wheel. Tears streamed silently down her face. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her landlord. We need to discuss your lease renewal. Please call immediately. Then, another email. This time from Julian West's legal team. Notice of intent to file personal suit. Harassment. Defamation. Discriminatory conduct. Damages, $2 million. Ashley's hand trembled. The screen blurred behind tears. This wasn't just about losing her job. This was about losing everything. Back in the executive suite, Charles Whitman faced the board. Christina Wells, the CFO, looked pale. We've lost 26% of our market value, she whispered. And it's still falling. Then came the second wave of devastation. Nexus Tech pulled out of negotiations. Meridian Financial terminated their contract. Others followed. 67% of Brightwell's clients. Gone. In less than a day. By 4 p.m., Brightwell's attorneys had started drafting emergency filings. The word no one wanted to say was finally spoken aloud. Bankruptcy. Down the hall, Derek Stanton sat alone in his office. His phone buzzed. An alert. SEC opens preliminary investigation into Nexus Tech Communications. Mark closed his eyes. His hands trembled. He knew. He was finished. At Cole Innovations, Xavier stood before his team. The decision had been made. Datasphere, the smaller, overlooked rival, was now their new partner. The contract had been signed. Xavier gazed out at the city skyline. Behind him, a screen displayed a live feed of Brightwell's stock. Down 34% and counting. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And it had only just begun. From the outside, the company still looked impressive. The gleaming glass tower, the polished logo out front, the buzz of high heels and designer suits pacing across marble floors, it all whispered power. But inside, cracks had already begun to widen. It started with silence. In the boardroom, the mood was tense. Charles Whitman, Brightwell's CEO, sat slumped in his leather chair, face pale, jaw tight. Around him, department heads whispered among themselves, avoiding his gaze. No one wanted to say it. No one wanted to be the first. But the elephant in the room was massive and impossible to ignore. A billionaire tech CEO had been publicly humiliated in their lobby, on camera. And not just any billionaire. Julian West. The man who had built coal innovations from the ground up. The man who held the keys to the next generation of cybersecurity technology. The man who, until just 24 hours ago, had been their final hope. And they had thrown him out like a delivery man, simply because of how he looked. Richard looked at the screen again. The footage played for the fifth time that morning, Ashley Monroe, the receptionist, sneering. The guards grabbing Xavier's arm. Derek Stanton, standing by, watching, saying nothing. And the worst part? They all knew who he was. Mark had known. Richard was sure of it now. The flicker in his eye, the hesitation. Mark had recognized Julian West. And had chosen to say nothing. Whether it was fear, arrogance, or something deeper, that silence had cost them everything. Richard stood suddenly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. "We need to control the narrative," he said, his voice sharp. "Now." The room fell silent. Christina Wells, the CFO, finally spoke. It might be too late. She turned her tablet toward the team. Stock prices. Plummeting. Headlines from every major outlet. Tech giant Stratton Dynamics under fire for humiliating black billionaire CEO. Julian West breaks silence, respect is earned. So is failure. Viral video sparks outrage, Stratton Dynamics faces backlash. Richard's heart sank. Still, he held onto the desperate thread of control. "Has anyone reached out to Cole's team?" he asked. Silence again. Christina hesitated. "They're not responding." Richard nodded slowly, as if the full gravity of the situation was only now hitting him in full. He turned away, staring out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Down below, reporters were already gathering. Cameras were pointed up at the building. Satellite vans blocked traffic. Microphones waited for statements that would never come. Brightwell's secrets were no longer inside these walls. They were out. And the world was watching. Elsewhere in the building, Brittany Keller sat frozen at her desk. The smirk she'd worn yesterday was long gone. Her eyes were red. Her fingers trembled. Her phone buzzed every few seconds, messages pouring in faster than she could delete them. Her name was trending, for all the wrong reasons. The security footage had gone viral. People had zoomed in. Screenshotted. Shared. Memes were circulating with her face, frozen mid-sneer. Captions read, "This is what corporate racism looks like." Others simply called her the receptionist who ruined a company. She had read the comments. They haunted her. "You deserve to be sued. I hope he owns your house next. Guess you're delivering packages now." It was no longer just professional. It was personal. They had found her LinkedIn. Her Instagram. Even her landlord. The image she'd worked so hard to build, designer blazers, iced lattes, curated selfies, had crumbled in less than 48 hours. Her phone buzzed again. New email, subject, notice of disciplinary review. Her breath caught. It was from HR. She was required to report to conference room C immediately. Ashley stood slowly, the world tilting slightly beneath her feet. Colleagues who had once laughed with her now avoided eye contact. No one said a word as she passed. She had become a ghost, one they all blamed. And perhaps, she thought, they were right to. On the mezzanine level, Melanie Harper watched it all unfold. She had seen it happen from the beginning, from the moment Julian West entered the lobby to the moment he was pushed out the doors like a nobody. Unlike the others, Vanessa had recognized him instantly. She had followed his work. Respected it. Admired it. And she had said nothing. Her hands had clenched into fists that morning. Her breath had caught in her throat. But she had stayed silent. Not out of agreement. out of fear. She was one of the few black managers at Brightwell. She knew the cost of being difficult, knew what happened to people who rocked the boat. So she had stood still, watched, and hated herself for it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She hesitated. Answered. Melanie Harper? The voice was deep, calm, familiar. Yes, she said quietly. Who is this? My name is Julian West. Her heart stopped. I believe you witnessed what happened in the lobby. Vanessa's voice cracked. Mr. Cole. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have. You wanted to, he interrupted gently. I saw it in your eyes. You wanted to speak up, but you didn't feel safe. I understand that. Her throat tightened. I make it a point to know the real innovators behind every company I consider working with, Xavier continued. Your work on the neural security protocol is impressive. You're being underutilized at Brightwell. Vanessa was speechless. Let's talk tomorrow, he said. 8 a.m. Emerson Hotel. Private breakfast. Just you and me. She nodded, though he couldn't see. Yes. Of course. And Vanessa, what happened yesterday wasn't just about me. It was about a system that allowed it to happen. Then, the line went dead. Vanessa lowered the phone. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Back in the executive suite, Charles Whitman's day had only gotten worse. His phone rang nonstop. Clients demanding explanations. Board members calling emergency meetings. Reporters circling like vultures. And then, the worst news of all. Cole Innovations had terminated all partnership discussions with Brightwell. Effective immediately. Richard had barely set the phone down when another call came through. This time, from James Harper, CEO of Nexus Tech, Brightwell's biggest competitor. James didn't mince words. We're pulling out of any shared projects. James, wait, Richard pleaded. We've been partners for over a decade. I don't care, Harper snapped. You humiliated the most respected black tech leader in the country. We can't be associated with that. Goodbye. Click. Dial tone. Richard stared at the silent receiver. His hands trembled. His company, his legacy, was unraveling faster than he could hold it together. Downstairs, Brittany Keller sat in conference room C, her palms sweaty, her eyes downcast. Across from her, two stern-faced HR representatives reviewed the footage again. Each frame felt like a dagger. Every sneer. Every word. Every shove. I didn't know who he was, Ashley mumbled. That's not the issue, the woman across from her replied. The issue is how you treated him. I thought he was lying, Ashley tried again. He didn't look like. She stopped. The sentence had already convicted her. The HR rep slid a document across the table. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. No severance. No references. Ashley stared at the paper, her world shrinking by the second. And then came the final blow. There's also a legal matter, the man added. Mr. Cole's legal team has filed intent to pursue personal charges. Harassment. Discrimination. Defamation. Ashley gasped. You're being sued, he confirmed. Personally. The room spun. This wasn't just the end of her job. It was the end of everything. Meanwhile, Julian West sat in his office. Calm. Composed. The city skyline sprawled out behind him. His team moved with quiet efficiency. Legal. PR, tech strategy. Stratton Dynamics had underestimated him. They thought they could humiliate him and walk away unscathed. But Xavier didn't believe in revenge. He believed in consequences. He tapped a few keys on his tablet. A message sent. Brightwell's stock dropped 12% in the next hour. then 18, then 23. By close of day, the board would be holding an emergency meeting. And by the end of the week, Stratton Dynamics Enterprises would no longer exist. The sun had barely risen over the city skyline, casting long, golden rays across the glass towers of downtown. But inside Stratton Dynamics Enterprises, there was no warmth. No light. Only a growing sense of dread that pressed down like a storm cloud refusing to lift. The boardroom, once a place of triumph and quarterly victories, had transformed into a battlefield of blame and survival. Charles Whitman stood at the head of the table, his usually crisp suit rumpled, his eyes sunken from another sleepless night. The once proud CEO looked defeated. And yet, the worst was still ahead. On the massive screen behind him, the Stratton Dynamics stock ticker refreshed in real time. Down 26%. Down 27%. The freefall wouldn't stop. Across the table sat Christina Wells, the company's CFO. She clutched her tablet like a lifeline, her knuckles white. And beside her, the board chair, Elizabeth Hamilton, a woman known for keeping her composure even during the 2008 crash, now looked visibly shaken. "Walk us through it again, Richard," Elizabeth said, her voice low and steady. "No spin. No corporate jargon. Just, what happened?" Richard sighed, his voice brittle as it left his throat. "Julian West came into our building yesterday morning. Unannounced. It's something he's known for, checking company culture before making any final decisions. We had a 9 o'clock meeting scheduled. But he came early. Dressed casually. Alone." He paused. No one interrupted. Our receptionist, Ashley Monroe, didn't recognize him. Dismissed him. Told him to go to the delivery entrance. When he tried to clarify, she got security involved. They physically removed him from the building. A tense silence followed. Then Thomas Byers, a board member with a background in media, raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me nobody recognized him? The man's been on the cover of Forbes, Bloomberg, tech leader, and you let him get dragged out by security?" Richard's voice cracked. "It gets worse." He glanced toward the far end of the table. Derek Stanton sat stiffly, his face pale, his hands motionless on the surface of the table. Mark was in the lobby. He saw the whole thing. And he said nothing. All eyes shifted to Mark. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just the sound of his career disintegrating in real time. "Roll the footage," Elizabeth ordered. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. Ashley's mocking smile. The guards gripping Xavier's arm. The smirk on Mark's face as he turned and walked away. And finally, Xavier's calm, unreadable expression as he was shoved out of the building. When the lights came back up, the silence was suffocating. I wasn't sure it was him," Mark offered weakly. "And if it was, why show up like that? No entourage? No warning?" "Because that's who he is," Richard snapped. "If you'd read the briefing materials, you'd know Cole does this. It's how he filters companies before finalizing any partnership." Christina cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've just received confirmation. Cole Innovations has officially withdrawn from our partnership. And they've issued a press release stating the reason is our failure to maintain an inclusive and ethical corporate environment." The board erupted. Half the room speaking at once. Panic. Rage. Disbelief. But Richard remained still. The man who had built Stratton Dynamics from the ground up now watched it unravel with a hollowness that couldn't be measured. "We're not done," Christina added. "Our legal team just informed me that Cole's PR firm has circulated the lobby footage to every major tech outlet. It's already trending on social media. Ashley Monroe's name is out there. The security guards. Even Mark." Elizabeth turned slowly toward Mark, her eyes narrowing. "We've also been made aware of your private communications with Nexus Tech. You were feeding confidential strategy documents to our competitor. For what? A golden parachute in case this company went under? Mark stammered. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, Christina said coldly, flipping her tablet around. It's proof. Your emails. Your encrypted messages. Your browsing history. All traced. And all forwarded to the SEC this morning. Mark's face turned ghostly white. Wait, SEC? Elizabeth stood. We'll be initiating your termination immediately. And you should prepare for what comes next. Legal counsel will be in touch. Richard watched as Mark was quietly escorted out of the room by 2 HR representatives. He didn't resist. He didn't even speak. Just walked, as though the weight of what he'd done had finally crushed him. As the board began to splinter into hushed conversations, Richard's assistant entered, her face pale. Sir, we have a problem. Richard turned to her, dread rising in his chest. What now? The footage has been leaked online. Not just to news sites. It's gone viral. And we've just received word that our top 3 clients are invoking the ethics clause in their contracts. They're terminating, effective immediately. Richard sank into his chair. He didn't speak. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Stratton Dynamics Enterprises, once valued at billions, was now hemorrhaging clients, investors, and any remaining goodwill it had left. It was more than a scandal. It was a death sentence. Meanwhile, across town, in the calm, glass-encased office of Coal Innovations, Julian West stood silently at the window. The city stretched before him, sprawling, alive, unbothered by the chaos unraveling a few miles away. His assistant entered the room. Sir, the board chair of Stratton Dynamics has requested a final call. She's asking for a chance to explain. Xavier didn't turn around. His voice was calm. Even. No response. And Charles Whitman's assistant says he'll offer anything. The building. A controlling stake. Whatever it takes to repair the partnership. Xavier finally turned, eyes like steel. There is no partnership. Not anymore. A long pause. Proceed with the next phase. Yes, sir. As the door closed behind his assistant, Xavier exhaled slowly. This hadn't been his intention. Not originally. He hadn't walked into Stratton Dynamics that morning looking to destroy anything. But he would never allow disrespect to stand unchallenged. He didn't believe in revenge. He believed in consequences. Back at Brightwell, the last flickers of hope were being extinguished. Employees gathered in the cafeteria, eyes glued to their phones as headlines refreshed every few seconds. Julian West terminates deal with Brightwell. Security footage shows CEO humiliated in lobby. Derek Stanton under federal investigation. One article featured a still image of Xavier being shoved out the revolving door, his cashmere sweater rumpled, his eyes staring calmly back at the building. The caption read, "They didn't recognize power until it walked away." Charles Whitman knew. It was over. By day's end, Brightwell's stock would plummet another 12%. Layoffs would begin within the week. Clients would continue to flee. And bankruptcy? That was no longer a question of if. Only when. But Xavier? Xavier had already moved on. At that very moment, he was finalizing the partnership with Datasphere, the very competitor Stratton Dynamics had once dismissed as too small to matter. And while Stratton Dynamics burned, Xavier built a new foundation, a new future, and a message the entire industry would never forget. Respect isn't optional. And underestimating the right person? That's a mistake you only get to make once. The air was warm that morning, golden sunlight spilling over the newly polished stone facade of what had once been Stratton Dynamics Enterprises. But the building was no longer a monument to cold ambition or exclusionary power. Now, it bore a new name etched into brushed steel letters above the entrance. The Cole Center for Innovation. Inside, where suits once strode with unchecked ego, there was now the soft hum of energy, of possibility. Rows of desks filled with young minds. Students in hoodies and jeans. Some black, some brown, some from working-class families whose parents had never stepped foot inside a corporate lobby. All of them focused. Engaged. Building code, trading ideas, working on prototypes that just a year earlier would have been dismissed as dreams. Melanie Harper moved confidently across the glass atrium. Her heels clicked on the polished floor, but there was no pretense in her walk, only purpose. In one hand, she carried a tablet filled with updates on the center's latest programs. In the other was a notebook, worn but meaningful. A reminder of where she had come from. Julian West was waiting for her on the upper floor. He stood at the glass railing overlooking the atrium, watching quietly. No security detail. No spotlight. Just a quiet man, in a tailored suit, whose presence commanded the space not with volume, but with vision. "Good morning, Xavier," Vanessa said, stepping beside him. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the students below. "You see that?" he asked softly. Vanessa followed his gaze. Two teenage girls, barely 16, were huddled together at a desk, sketching out a neural encryption model on a digital whiteboard. One of them paused to explain something to the other. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, her voice steady. Vanessa smiled. "They're building something we never had at their age," she said quietly. "A place that believes in them." Xavier nodded again. "That's the point." There was a long pause between them, one of shared understanding. Of reflection. Then Xavier turned and handed Vanessa a folder. Inside were architectural plans, blueprints for new centers. One in Atlanta. Another in Chicago. And proposals for Miami and Seattle. "The board approved our national expansion," he said. "And the Department of Education is offering grants to support our outreach programs in underserved districts." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. "That's huge." "It's just the beginning," Xavier replied. They walked together down the corridor toward the incubator space. Startups were already occupying what used to be Brightwell's executive suites. The old corner office that once belonged to Derek Stanton was now a co-working lab where three young founders, two of them black, were running simulations for a new cybersecurity platform. As they passed, Xavier stopped for a moment, watching them through the glass. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if Mark hadn't said anything that day?" Vanessa asked carefully. Xavier was silent for a beat. Then, quietly, he did say something. Just not with words. Vanessa turned to look at him. "He looked at me," Xavier said. "He knew who I was. And he let it happen." That silence, that smile, was louder than anything he could have said out loud. They continued walking. Vanessa understood now. The downfall of Stratton Dynamics hadn't been caused by a single word, but by the absence of integrity. By choices made quietly, in hallways and lobbies, when it mattered most. But out of that silence, something louder had been born. Change. As they reached the main hall, Xavier stopped to take a call. It was a senior advisor from the Department of Commerce, confirming his keynote at the upcoming National Tech Policy Forum. Vanessa waited as Xavier spoke, his voice calm, thoughtful, direct. He wasn't just speaking for his company anymore, but for an entire generation of builders, thinkers, and dreamers who had been ignored for too long. When he hung up, Vanessa asked, "You're really going into policy?" "I have to," Xavier replied. "We can't fix a broken industry from the sidelines. We need accountability. Frameworks. Real standards." Vanessa nodded slowly. "And the Cole Center?" she asked. Xavier turned to her. "It needs a new executive director. Someone who's lived the system, challenged it, and now is ready to rebuild it." Her eyes widened. "You built this," he said, simply. "From the programs to the protocols. From the classrooms to the culture. I can't think of anyone better." There was a long silence. Then, a smile slowly broke across Vanessa's face. I accept. Far across the city, in a worn-out apartment, Brittany Keller sat alone. The blinds drawn. Her laptop glowing faintly in the darkness. A fresh rejection email sat unopened in her inbox. She didn't need to read it. She already knew. The call center job hadn't lasted. A customer had recognized her voice from the viral video. HR said it was too disruptive to keep her on. She'd packed her few belongings that same day. Her phone buzzed. It was her landlord, again. Asking about the overdue rent. Ashley didn't answer. She just stared at the wall. There had been a time when she thought power was in her hands. When a smile could be smug, and a whisper could sting. When status was something you wore like a blazer, and dismissed like a package. But now, she'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Respect isn't a costume. And consequences don't always come with warnings. Across town, Derek Stanton sat in a stuffy courthouse waiting room. The federal investigation had ended in a plea deal. Corporate espionage. Breach of fiduciary duty. Wire fraud. He avoided prison, but lost everything else. His house. His career. His reputation. Now he was applying for low-level consulting gigs. None of them responded. Not when you're the executive who tried to sabotage a billionaire and got caught doing it. Mark opened his phone. A notification flashed on screen. Call Center for Innovation launches national expansion. The accompanying photo showed Xavier and Vanessa standing together at the new Chicago branch ribbon cutting. Mark didn't finish reading. He tossed the phone into his bag and walked out into the rain. Back at the Call Center, Xavier stood on the rooftop terrace. The city skyline shimmered below, its tall towers casting long shadows, but not nearly as long as the ones he'd spent his life walking through. Vanessa joined him with 2 coffees in hand. The first cohort of graduates just signed job offers, she said. 10 of them with us. 15 more at partner companies. Xavier nodded. And the incubator? Fully booked for the next 2 quarters. And our scholarship fund doubled after the gala last week. He smiled faintly. Then, silence settled again, gentle, like a moment held in reverence. A year ago, this very rooftop had been unreachable to so many. Now it was a platform, not just for visibility, but for voice. You know, Vanessa said, you never told me what the final email said. The one you sent, just before everything collapsed. Xavier took a long sip of his coffee. Then he looked out over the city, eyes soft with memory. It was just one sentence, he said. Vanessa waited. Finally, he spoke. Respect is earned. So is failure. They stood together in the golden light, silent, steady, as the wind passed over the city. And beneath them, within the walls of the Call Center, hope was no longer an abstract dream. It had become structure. System. And story. The kind that echoes. Long after the glass doors close. The sun had started to dip beyond the skyline, painting the horizon in soft shades of amber and lavender. Julian West stood alone on the rooftop of the Call Center, watching the light fade over a city that once turned its back on him. He wasn't thinking about revenge. Not anymore. He was thinking about legacy. Because some victories aren't loud. They don't come with applause or headlines. They arrive in quiet moments. Like watching a student receive her first job offer. Like hearing a young black engineer say, "This is the first place I've ever felt seen." Or simply standing on ground that once rejected you, and knowing it belongs to someone better now. Vanessa stepped out onto the rooftop, holding a single envelope in her hand. "A letter came in for you," she said softly. "From someone unexpected." Xavier took the envelope and opened it. The handwriting was shaky. The ink slightly smudged. But the name at the bottom was clear. Ashley Monroe. Inside was a short note. Just a few lines. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I wanted you to know I see it now. What I was blind to. What I thought I could control with a smile or a whisper. You changed everything. And not just for yourself. For all of us. Xavier folded the letter slowly. There were no tears. No satisfaction. Just stillness. He turned to Vanessa. Let's keep going. She smiled, understanding without needing to ask. Because that's what real power does. It doesn't destroy for sport. It builds. It lifts. It transforms. And sometimes, it forgives. Down below, the lights of the Cole Center flickered on, floor by floor, like stars appearing in a new constellation. A beacon for every young mind who'd been told they didn't belong. A signal that their time had finally come. And as Julian West turned back toward the city, his voice echoed in memory. The greatest obstacle is underestimation. But when they don't see you coming, they can't prepare for what you'll become. Because in the end, this was never just about a mistake in a lobby. It was about a moment. That turned into a movement. A movement that reminded the world. Respect is not optional. And the underestimated always have the final word. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of standing your ground, of choosing integrity when the world expects silence, then subscribe and join us here on Storytime with Jack. Because every day, we bring you stories of justice, redemption, and quiet strength. And remember, you are not alone. You are not powerless. And your story is still being written.